Hey y'all, this recording we're going to talk about oral citations and the proper way to do oral citations. I don't know if you've ever given a presentation before and are not necessarily sure how to cite oral citations. We're going to go through that today. And remember, in your outline, you're still using APA 7th edition, and you're going to be using APA citations as well for your oral citations, although most citations are still the same when you cite them orally. But also when you're doing your outlines, just for citation purposes, make sure you still have your internal citations, but you're also stating how and where you are going to orally cite. So you're typing it out word for word, say the author, date, type of source, whatever you do for your citation, type it all the way out, get to the end of the sentence, and have your internal citation. And then at the very end, make sure you have your reference page. This is really, really important for your speeches and your outlines to make sure you're not plagiarizing and you have an ethical way of citing. All right, so starting with oral citations, when you're citing sources in your speech, make sure you're demonstrating a quality and range of research. Make sure you have research throughout every supporting point. So in your main point one, say, for example, if your speech requires you to have 4 citations, make sure that you spread it out and don't have all your citations in just your main point 1. Make sure you're spreading it out equally between main point 1, main point 2, and main point 3. As we kind of go through the Toulmin's model and better understanding of how to make persuasive arguments, you'll get a little bit more of an idea of how to make an argument in general and how to use a citation in order to support your material. If you're doing this in your 3 separate points, you're going to have 3 separate arguments that you will use as separate support. So don't just have it cited in one area. Make sure the quality of your speech is continuous instead of it just being in one area. But also make sure your range of research is large. This means that when you're going and looking for information, don't just type in what you're looking for. Type a vague term in and start reading, because what you're looking for may not necessarily be what you find. You might have a different idea of the truth in your head. So make sure that you're reading into all the information that you possibly can handle before actually writing down a claim or a statement. Make sure that you're following the research rather than leading the research, because if you lead the research, then you're not necessarily sure about where the research has gone in the past, and you may not be true. Make sure you have reliable sources that support your position, like we talked about earlier in the last lecture over sources, and making sure you have correct sources, making sure you're ethical in your search for sources and you're not plagiarizing, and you're citing everything you need to. Find the most credible source, the most credible person that said your source or said the information that you need from your source, and use that. That's how you gain ethos and credibility as a speaker as well. Helps you avoid plagiarism. Yes, citing your sources is avoiding plagiarism. It doesn't help you avoid it. It is avoiding it. So make sure that you're citing information that is not common knowledge. If you question whether it's common knowledge or not, cite it. That way you know for sure. So it also enhances your authority, your efficacy as a speaker, and it wins support from your viewpoint. The more sources and the credible sources that you have in factual information that you're using will allow the audience to truly believe in what you're saying. Remember, we want to get the audience 100% on board with what you're talking about, but also enables your listeners to locate your sources when you orally cite it. So looking at oral citations, the proper way to orally cite is using oral citations briefly to alert the audience to the author or origin of source, the type of source, title, or the date of the source. So you need to have 2 out of these 4. Make sure you have author, the type of source. Is it coming from a website? I prefer when you do the type of source, if it's coming from a website, I prefer using the site So origin. So you can use author and origin, and that makes up for your 2. So say James Taylor said in Guitar Center's website that blah, 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 right? So I identified it was a website, but the type of website. That way, it increases the quality of your position. It increases the quality and your credibility as a speaker. Or you can have the title or the description of source or the date of source. If you're using a scholarly article, sometimes using the author and the title is the best way to do it. And sometimes you'll only have 2 or 3 of these instead of having all 4. So if you do only have 2 or 3, don't worry. You can still use 2. Every single time you you cite your source, make sure you're using 2. Another thing that you need to think about too is when going through this, another thing you need to think about is if you only have 1, or if it's extremely hard or you don't want to say one of the citations, one of these types of citations, probably not a credible source. Find another one. Take parts of the article and Google it and find a better source that has 2, or has 2 you're willing to say in front of an audience. So make sure you're establishing the source's trustworthiness. That kind of goes along with, if you don't feel like you feel comfortable in the trustworthiness of the site, Google the information, Google the statistics, the primary, the secondary source, qualifiers, and that's when you'll find whether or not it's a good source. If you are not using good sources, you will lose points throughout your speech because you will not have the quality information that you need. Qualify the source. Make sure that you have a brief description of the source's qualifications to address the topic, especially when we're going through the persuasive speech, especially when we're going through the training and briefing. Make sure we know that it's qualified. If you're only using the author and the date, we're not going to know why that author is important or why that source is important as well. So make sure that you qualify that source. The source qualifier is really, really good for your credibility and enhances your authority as a speaker. And avoid a mechanical delivery. Change it up. Don't use the same oral citations every time. If you say according to blah, 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 in blah, 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 then the next time you should say the quote first and then end it with, this is from blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. So change up your oral citations. Don't use the same one every single time. After writing an English paper, I have to go back through and fix a lot of that. If I say, according to, Michael Smith in 2018, blah, 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 I find myself doing that over and over again because I am a habitual being. And so make sure that if you find yourself doing that during a speech, that you change it up on the next one and don't use the same boring way of citing your source. Let me know if you ever have any questions about this, and you can always send me your outlines ahead of time to make sure that you are citing it correctly or you need help with, credibility or research. I know for some of you, this is your first college class that you've had to do extensive research in, and you will have to do extensive research during the persuasive speech, especially for content. So if you're having any issues doing any type of location or any issues with trying to find credible sources, using library.ttu.edu, clicking on those databases down there and utilizing those as well. If you're having issues with keywords, need a couple of tricks in order to find stuff, feel free to let me know. I've been researching for a very long time, and I understand it can be a struggle at first, but once you get the hang of it, I promise it gets way easier. And if you're struggling and taking way too long to do something, then you're probably not doing it right. So as you go through your information literacy assignment, especially, let me know if you have any questions over research, and we can do a Zoom, a screencast, whatever you need in order to find sources, and that way you're not wasting a ton of time by not using or doing things correctly.